are looking at a remarkable and yet lost railroad. It wasn't around for that long in railroad terms. It was created out of a heap of economic ash with the intent that it would become a healthy enterprise and then be terminated. Conrail saved the northeastern railroad industry from a mass extinction event. This included its constituent parts and the smaller independent roads orbiting around it. It operated from 1976 to 1999, when it was then split up into two pieces. Norfolk Southern and CSX each received large sections of the former Conrail. The Conrail story begins with the failure of the bankrupt Penn Central Railroad. The Penn Central merger was approved in 1968 by merging the New York Central and the Pennsylvania railroads. The two roads announced plans to merge in 1960. Back then, it wasn't unusual for the Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC, to take a number of years to approve any merger. Some mergers in the U.S. took so long to be approved that at least one of the merger partners sank into such bad shape waiting that the other road lost all interest. You would think that after waiting for 8 years, the Penn Central had had time to plan a smooth merger while waiting for the approval. The New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad, both heavyweights in Eastern railroading, were still fairly healthy back in 1968, but their operating styles were difficult to blend. There was infighting between the New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad staffs that had been merged together. They referred to each staff group as the Red Team for the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Green Team for the New York Central. That was a prescription for problems in cooperation. It's hard to have two teams within a team. The Penn Central merger was created to end the competition of the two roads and strip out the duplicate trackage to create an efficient carrier. Instead, the merger of two equals brought the competition inside the new railroad. Penn Central declared itself bankrupt by June 21, 1970. Freight car loads that weren't damaged by derailments were often lost in the system from differing paperwork methods and computer systems that were not compatible for sharing data. Generations of accumulated work rule agreements in the various trades and crafts had been thrown together in the Penn Central merger. It made life difficult for both workers and managers. If the Northeast fell, the entire U.S. railroad industry could soon go with it. Even the Western shippers using healthy Western roads would wonder how their goods would ever get to the East if the handoff couldn't be made. Shipments were frequently delayed, sometimes lost or damaged in derailments from poor track conditions. This is the original 1975 USRA plan for the Conrail system. Not shown is the bankrupt Erie-Lackawanna Railroad and its 2,800 miles of track that was also tossed into the new Conrail. Track upkeep was a patchwork due to lack of funds. The effects of bad track would reduce earning capacity. The result was more maintenance deferral, taking the whole system into a death spiral, beyond the point of no return. An aftershock was the Lehigh Valley declaring bankruptcy 3 days after Penn Central. This Erie-Lackawanna-powered Conrail train came out of Croxton Yard. Erie-Lackawanna was wrecked by Hurricane Agnes in 1972. It was from an earlier merger of Erie and the smaller Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. These two had already worked in cooperation to reduce duplicate trackage since the 1950s. In 1976, the U.S. government placed the huge bankrupt Penn Central system, along with other regional bankrupt roads, into a basket called Consolidated Rail Corporation. It looked like a reform school for bad railroads. In short, everyone called it Conrail. It was an emergency creation as a government-funded private company. They sprinkled a few $1 billion on this concoction and gave the new Conrail solution an April 1, 1976 birthday. Conrail became the largest U.S. railroad at the time, with a total of 34,000 miles of track. Few gave Conrail much of a chance. The April 1st start date seemed unnerving. The trailing red, white, and blue SD-45 was a former Erie-Lackawanna bicentennial unit, formerly number 3632. This chart shows the forming of Conrail. On the top is the New York Central and Pennsy that formed Penn Central. The New Haven was tossed into this group as well. This group went into Conrail with the large roads of the Reading, the Lehigh Valley, Erie-Lackawanna, and the Central Railroad of New Jersey. A few smaller lines not shown followed into the fray. The Lehigh Valley Railroad trackage shown here became part of Conrail. The D&H was given former Lehigh Valley diesels and granted trackage rights on the Lehigh Valley line to give Conrail some competition and shippers another choice of service. Fourth back is a Central New Jersey GP7. The Central Railroad of New Jersey fell into Conrail as it had been bankrupt since 1967. You can see from these early Conrail scenes that the track was in bad shape, needing all the renewal possible. Conrail spent years working on that. Earlier, derailments had plagued the Penn Central. Trains derailing on the main line were one thing, but derailments were occurring even at walking speed in freight classification yards. The first diesel painted in the new Conrail blue was number 3091, a GP40, shown here as the third unit. The Reading units brought 215 diesels to the mix of nearly 5,000 Conrail diesels at the startup. This is the old Reading Railroad route map. The Reading was known as a heavy coal hauler from anthracite country. Early Conrail. You never knew what to expect in power assignments back then. The winter of 1976 and 77 had record snowfall that plagued Conrail's early efforts. Inherited from Penn Central was a collection of about 160 assorted electric locomotives, such as these 4,400 horsepower E44s. All the electric locomotives were retired by 1981. Conrail had nearly 5,000 locomotives of numerous models from all the merged railroads. They were largely worn out. Locomotives that could still pull a train faced chronic derailments. The track was in terrible shape. Shipping customers were turning to trucks and highways more and more. Many of the lines Conrail inherited were built in earlier times when coal hauling was more important. That business was in serious decline by 1976. Many manufacturing plants had also moved away to the south. All this and more was faced and dealt with. Jordan navigated Conrail's way through the Ford and Carter presidential administrations. The 1980 Staggers Act brought new federal deregulation laws. The Staggers Act, by Representative Harley O. Staggers of West Virginia, gave the railroads the right to set the rates of hauling freight on their own, and the rules for abandoning unproductive trackage were greatly relaxed. In short, it was deregulation. GP38-2, number 8045, was one of 233 from Penn Central. The last unit, 3105, was a GP40, one of 272, also from the Penn Central. Ridgewood was the location on the old Erie Main Line where power had to run around trains to conduct their business, dropping off cars and to also use the Bergen County line. Conrail turned to leasing and borrowing power, such as these Canadian National units. Conrail's inherited locomotives that weren't sold off were rebuilt by the hundreds. Third back is 2501, a 1964-built former New York Central U-25B in new Conrail colors. Despite all the renumbering and shuffling around, 2501 had the same number on the New York Central, the Penn Central, and finally, Conrail. "6520 on the point is a General Electric 1966-built ex-Pennsylvania Railroad U-28C, still wearing its old number, but in fresh Conrail blue. It was later renumbered to 6820. SD45 6133 was inherited from the Pennsylvania Railroad through Penn Central. Conrail gained 174 SD45s total from Penn Central, Reading, and the Erie-Lackawanna. U-36B, number 2973, was one of 4 on Conrail. Conrail bought the 4 that were diverted from an auto train order at General Electric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Edward Jordan was selected as CEO in 1976 to run the new Conrail solution. Jordan was a former insurance executive. He had no prior experience with railroading. Therefore, he had no preconceived notions or favoritisms to one group or the other, green or red. Jordan was CEO until 1980, during the critical first 4 years. Revised agreements between labor and management helped tremendously. Jordan's efforts would pay off. The system had been stabilized, even revitalized in many ways by 1981. On the plus side, long-distance passenger trains had already been passed off to Amtrak since 1971. The commuter trains were still Conrail's burden. By January 1, 1983, all commuter equipment, operational and employee costs were transferred to local and regional transit authorities. This was a huge relief for a road that was just interested in hauling freight to the best of their abilities. These Penn Central FL9s inherited by Conrail were capable of powering trains from either electrical third rail or in non-electrified territory by an internal diesel. There were 56 of them. These were eventually turned over to commuter railroads and off the Conrail roster. You may have noticed several times by now that crews in the front cab frequently toss a paper out the window as they run by. They aren't littering. It's a time-honored practice of giving trackside rail fans a copy of their train orders. This Norfolk and Western powered train is actually a Delaware and Hudson trackage rights train on former Central Railroad of New Jersey tracks, now owned by Conrail. Part of the story was the fate of the Delaware and Hudson, or D&H. The D&H was chosen to give Conrail regional competition. This small road was part of the Norfolk and Western through a subsidiary called Dureco at the time, basically a holding company. At one time, even the Norfolk and Western itself was under the corporate shadow of the Pennsy. How things can change. With the 1968 Penn Central merger, the D&H looked for a good merger partner. The D&H was financially in fair shape back then. All the possible merger candidates were not. The Erie-Lackawanna had given D&H useful connections in the past. When the Erie-Lackawanna fell into the Conrail merger, the USRA gave the D&H sizable trackage rights on former Erie lines and former Reading lines. This is a map of the D&H in the Conrail era. The dotted lines indicate trackage rights sections. These trackage rights even extended down to Washington, D.C. No financial help was offered to the D&H. The D&H was very popular for its pleasing blue and gray colors and its passenger train promotion under its president, Frederick Dumaine. A number of Conrail captured locomotives were transferred over to the D&H. The D&H would hang on in one form or another for a time. By 1984, it became part of the Guilford system until bought by the Canadian Pacific later in 1991. The Canadian Pacific would then have service all the way down to Washington, D.C. Now we'll go to part of the Pittsburgh line of former Pennsylvania Railroad fame. We'll begin in Altoona, Pennsylvania, at Control Point Rose, then move to Control Point Works, and then work our way west to Crescent. Here at Altoona, Conrail had taken on a clean, organized, and updated look. On the point is a 4,000 horsepower GE C40-8W, typical of the 236 units bought by Conrail beginning in 1990. By 1986, Conrail had cut the fleet of almost 5,000 locomotives, consisting of worn and mismatched power, down to half. They could put reliable, rebuilt, and new power on trains, and the colors matched. The two pushing SD40-2s were of a group of 120 bought in Conrail's first 3 years. These two were equipped with Helper Link, a method of safely uncoupling on the fly to save time. SW1200 number 9340 dates back to 1957 when bought new by the Pennsylvania Railroad. GP15 number 1660 was one of 100 1979 built units that were essentially modernized GP9s. These were built for yard and local service, and they were not equipped with dynamic brakes. On the back we find 9343, another SW1200, and 9525, an SW1500 bought in 1972 by Penn Central. Last is a GP10 rebuilt in 1978 at Paducah from a 1956 Pennsylvania Railroad GP9. These eastbounds have come down from the grade over the horseshoe curve. The rear helpers will be cut off here at Altoona. Running through Altoona, it was hard to miss all the dead-lined Conrail power that had served a purpose until replaced with newer, more efficient and reliable power. To mention a few, GP30s, early GE U-boat power, plus early Jeeps that were retired in black paint were lined up for disposal here. West of the yard is Porta Road Crossing with a westbound led by a C39-8. The Pensy-style position light signal on the far right is about to change its indication to protect this train from any following trains. Helping this train on the rear is a pair of SD40-2s that were brought in new when Conrail was just over 1 year old in July 1977. 5 miles west of Altoona is the famous Horseshoe Curve in the Allegheny Mountains, shown here back in August 1978 when Conrail was just over 2 years old. This landmark curve was built here in 1854 by the Pennsylvania Railroad. Mountain faces were cut back, and huge fills completed the work. It was done primarily with hand tools and labor. The former Erie-Lackawanna SD45-2, numbered by Conrail as 6659, has an oversized fuel tank. We'll see this type of locomotive later in Conrail Blue. On the point is an Alco C630, one of 27 from the Reading and the Penn Central. These would be retired by 1980. Conrail had no future for any Alco locomotives in a move towards standardization. In a few more years, new work agreements would eliminate the caboose, or cabin cars, from the picture too. Here back in 1978, Conrail used its 4 main tracks. By 1981, it was reduced to 3 main tracks by removing number 2 track. You can already see a tie replacement program in progress. Another scenic location is at the mid-grade or MG Tower. The tower is 1.5 miles west of the Horseshoe Curve. There are crossovers here for all the main tracks. The tower was built in 1944 and open until 1978. During periods of heavy track maintenance, it was sometimes remanned to help sort out heavy traffic with improved safety. 10 years later, in 1988, Conrail had a unified new look. The tracks were now in good shape, the power was dependable, and they were making money. Before its fall, the former Pennsylvania Railroad line once boasted of being the standard railroad of the world. Track work was once again maintained to the best standards. Conrail 5070, a B40-8, is followed by 2 other sister units. These 4,000 horsepower General Electric diesels were from a group of 30 bought by Conrail in 1988 for fast intermodal trains. The flat car loads are automotive frames. This train was TV11. It picked up the auto frames in Reading, Pennsylvania. Former Erie-Lackawanna SD45-2, number 6665, followed by 6664, are point helpers assigned to Crescent. The horns are right over the engineer and not in the usual Conrail placement. They had huge, visually prominent 5,000-gallon fuel tanks. The Erie-Lackawanna brought 13 of this model to Conrail. They featured dual control stands. The big fuel tanks allowed the EL to run hot UPS trains from New Jersey to Chicago without refueling. (6425) and (6393) are SD40-2 point helpers. We'll see them in the next scene returning light to the east. Conrail bought 165 of these in their early years of 1977 to 1979. These were ordered with the older Flexicoil trucks, whereas all other roads had them built with the newer HTC or high-traction 6-axle trucks. About to run by us, the pair of ex-Erie Lackawanna SD45-2s are now pushing as a rear helper set. Stanley Crane ran Conrail as chairman from 1981 to 1988. Crane was a true, experienced railroad insider who had retired from the healthy Southern Railway. He built on Jordan's base with his own ideas. Usually, a new top executive will drag in his own group of subordinates and replace existing staff. Crane did not. He kept the existing Conrail staff. This must have been a positive motivating factor several levels down. In 1981, Conrail finally turned a small profit. Much of that credit goes to Edward Jordan's prior efforts. Crane faced a recession that would normally earmark dramatic reductions in route miles. Lines that would never prove worthy were cut. With his experience in railroading, Crane knew that cutting too deeply would work against Conrail when the inevitable U.S. economic recovery would come. This westbound is exiting the 1904 opened 3,600-foot-long Gallitzin Tunnel. This portal was taken out of service later in 1998 after the adjacent Allegheny Tunnel was upgraded. This westbound is exiting the 1854 opened 3,600-foot-long Allegheny Tunnel. This tunnel would eventually be enlarged to accommodate 2 tracks with the clearance for double-stack trains. Conrail was 85% government-owned and 15% by labor when first formed. Management and labor worked out ways to cut the cost of labor and save the line from being diced up. In 1981, Ronald Reagan was the new U.S. president. Reagan's administration disliked any public funding of railroads. They wanted to break up Conrail and sell it off in pieces at this point. Stanley Crane steered around that. He had turned down $300 additional million in government handouts. Conrail soon paid back $1.58 billion by making Conrail a private company with selling shares of stock. At that time, it was the largest public offering of stock in U.S. history. The underwriters made a public offering of over 58 million shares of Conrail stock at $28 a share. The heavy volume of trading that followed, based on Conrail's viability, would prove the analysts right. Two helper sets exit the Gallitzin Tunnel's west portal. Eastbounds in the late afternoon and evening were often so heavy that fleets of light helpers would head west to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, to assist eastbounds. Eastbound traffic uses the 1,600-foot-long New Portage Tunnel. It was originally built in the 1850s by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for the New Portage Railroad. The Pennsy bought this line in 1857. This eastbound is crossing under the Tunnel Hill Street overpass in Gallitzin. westbound coal train will begin its descent to Altoona in less than a mile after cresting the west slope of the Alleghenies. The rear SD40 helpers will remain until Altoona. Now we shift our attention to Cresson, Pennsylvania, a few miles to the west. Cresson is the base for helpers to Altoona for eastbounds and to Johnstown for westbounds. The MO tower is on the right. The MO tower was still active here in these scenes. If you look closely, you can see the operator moving around in the window. It was removed later in 1998. These scenes were shot from a bridge that has also been removed since 1995. The Conrail Blue Power, the MO Tower, and even the spot the camera occupies cannot be duplicated today. The original idea behind the merger of the New York Central and the Pennsy into Penn Central was to delete duplicate routes and make a more efficient railroad. The rules to abandon poorly used lines were too complex before the Staggers Act. In the Crane era, a reduction of over 4,000 miles of track cut costs dramatically, all without impacting revenues or service. The Staggers Act was making things easier for all U.S. roads. Railroads were free to also set their own rates and compete better with trucking. Some of Conrail's eliminated trackage was spun off to short lines that had more favorable labor structures. By 1980, a round of mergers was approved to form the CSX system. Another approved merger created Norfolk Southern in 1982. Conrail was no longer the biggest U.S. road, but it was becoming more efficient and well-run, making it a survivable railroad. Stanley Crane's replacement, Richard Sanborn, died in office after several months in 1989. We'll leave Portage and take up an eastbound path. The faint yellow lines are other Conrail lines. The next section will bring highlights back to the Reading area. The first scene will be in Tyrone, Pennsylvania, as we work our way east. In the morning fog, a westbound is led by a C40-8W. The station on the left is from the long-defunct Huntington and Broad Top Mountain Railroad that once connected here. Sadly, this station was torn down in 2001. The Pennsylvania Railroad-built Hunt Tower is retired now and open to the public as a museum. Back in this day, Amtrak had the Pennsylvanian and the Three Rivers train. Nowadays, only the Pennsylvanian runs through here. The small station in the center is for Amtrak patrons. The large station back from the tracks is the former Pennsy station. Huntington, Pennsylvania is located about 98 miles west of Harrisburg along the Juniata River. The population here is around 6,900. James Hagan, a former CSX executive with prior Conrail experience, took over in 1989. His emphasis was on lowering operating costs, track upgrades for faster trains, better marketing for new business opportunities, and new replacement locomotives bought during the 1990s. Now Conrail could operate with 2,000 locomotives with higher horsepower and do the work that once needed twice as many locomotives. Cutbacks of more unproductive lines came again. By 1993, trackage had shrunk to just 20,000 miles of track. A little less than 12,000 miles were route miles. Rounding the curve, a westbound manifest is powered with two SD80 Max that were new for Conrail in 1996. TV55 runs between Harrisburg and Salem, Illinois, where it will become Union Pacific's NYDAZ, meaning New York to Dallas-Fort Worth, expedited. After TV55 runs by, heading west, a westbound powered by a GP40-2 and an SD40-2 stops here to pick up a string of 10 cars. It will work its way through a series of switches to pick up the cars, assemble the train, and then continue west. While all this is going on, another westbound makes its grand entrance. Once an air test is performed, the crew will continue west. We'll backtrack our eastward journey to pick this train up at speed a little west of Lewistown at Mattawanna. This iron ore train has DPU, or Remote Distributed Power Units, here at Mattawanna. Heading east again, we'll see more trains from Mifflin to Duncannon, Pennsylvania. This is near Mexico, Pennsylvania, on Farm Road Crossing. The tracks here are right on the bank of the Juniata River. The river has been a trackside companion from Tyrone. This is a tributary of the Susquehanna River. Heading west is a Conrail executive train behind a pair of E8 units. Next is Mail 9 from Morrisville, Pennsylvania to Chicago, Illinois. After it passes, you'll hear the automated Conrail defect detector on a railfan's nearby scanner. Next will be Duncannon, where the Juniata River merges into the Susquehanna River. The train is crossing Sherman's Creek, with Hawk Rock dominating the background. This is the location of the town of Duncannon, with a population hovering around 1,500. We'll see another train here, this time heading east. Perdix is about 2 miles east of Duncannon. This is just east of the Rockville Bridge coming into Enola Yard in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, looking northwest. We'll leave the old Pensy line that takes a more southeastern alignment to Philadelphia. Our trip will resume on the former Reading Railroad line that runs all the way east to Allentown. The first stop will be at Lebanon, Pennsylvania. At West Lawn, an eastbound coal train heads for a power plant in New York. From here we'll follow a local down to the old Reading-Akron secondary line that has been cut back to Denver, Pennsylvania. This is a GP10 rebuilt from a 1956 GP9, originally from the New York Central. We're back on the former Reading main line at Wyomissing. We'll see one more Wyomissing train, and then a mail train bypassing Reading at CP Belt. At CP Belt, the train will go around the belt to Wyomissing and on west to Harrisburg. This map shows a simplified view of the principal Conrail lines to its all-important rail connections in Chicago. Conrail not only had the former Pincy line through the Alleghenies, but the former New York Central water level route that avoided grades by swinging to the north and turning east at Albany. We'll head west and see some locations beginning at Waterloo, Indiana, and work our way back east. This is 6:57 p.m. with a manifest BRSE from the Belt Railway Clearing Yard in Chicago to Selkirk, New York, below Albany. It's July 10, 1997. From sundown to early morning, Conrail ran a floodgate of trains through here on Conrail's Chicago line. The next train is eastbound ELCO from Elkhart to Columbus, Ohio. At Toledo, this train will turn compass south. The next train will be a westbound Conrail BUEL from Buffalo to Elkhart. Powering the train is an impressive pair of new units from the General Electric factory in Erie, headed for the BNSF on their first run. Cleveland was the center of Conrail's Big X. This X symbolized Conrail's new focus on long-haul premium service. David Levan became Conrail's CEO by August 1994. All these years were spent fending off buyout or takeover attempts by the Norfolk Southern and CSX. All the while, Conrail was focusing its business efforts on the core lines that formed the so-called Big X. Short haulage of intermodal cars less than about 700 miles was too difficult to make a profit on. Conrail became very focused on the big, high-speed, long-haul business. It was about this time that they looked for ways to extend that range on tracks that they could someday own. This is a westbound TV 79 from Northburg, New Jersey to Chicago, Illinois. We're at Willowick, Ohio, heading to Collinwood Yard in Cleveland for a crew change. On Conrail Chicago line is a coal train that came from the connection off the Youngstown line from Ash to Beulah. We're at Conneaut, Ohio, at the Chestnut Street crossing near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. After this westbound clears, an eastbound with foreign power will run by. We're 55 miles west of Buffalo, New York, at Westfield, New York, at the Gale Street crossing. The double-stack train is TV 201 from Kearney, New Jersey to Chicago, running on a yellow signal. We'll skip over to Buffalo, New York to find TV 7 running from Boston to Chicago. This is ELSE from Elkhart, Indiana to Selkirk, New York. The next train, also an eastbound, is a TV-14 from Chicago to Boston. SEEL is a Selkirk to Elkhart westbound. This is near Lake Avenue Crossing. BUIN, a manifest freight from Buffalo to Indianapolis. It just left Seneca Yard. Once the eastbound starts up, notice the trailing SD50 unit, number 6831. Conrail had 135 of these. This one was from the last order in 1986, having the larger 4,500-gallon fuel tank. The next train will be TV 556X from Chicago to Croxton, New Jersey, led by a St. Louis Southwestern, or Cotton Belt, GP60, followed by an SP B39-8. During the mid-1990s, another nationwide round of mergers was taking place in the U.S. Conrail wanted to remain independent, but now feared marginalization. After years of cutting back, Conrail now sought expansion, but in a meaningful way, by buying Ailing SP's subsidiary Cotton Belt line. It would have given Conrail a great deal more business into a growing Texas market. The UP had already merged the Katy and the Missouri Pacific line, which included the former Texas and Pacific. Wasn't that enough? Conrail probably wondered. Union Pacific bought the SP in 1995. UP decided to retain the Cotton Belt, dashing Conrail's plans. The possible Cotton Belt purchase may have been Conrail's last real hope of continuing survival as an independent road. Conrail had a good connection to Cotton Belt's line at St. Louis. This and other Conrail lines would have done well extending into the Texas market. We'll never know how a Conrail merger with the Cotton Belt would have changed Conrail's future beyond 1997. This is TV 550, a Wednesday-only train between BNSF in Chicago and Syracuse, New York. This is Chili Junction, about 11 miles west of Rochester. This train is coming off the West Shore Line to head west on the Chicago line. The main line runs to the northeast, and another line, the West Shore Line, turns off to bypass Rochester. This train is led by a Locomotive Management Services-owned C40-8W unit. Conrail and GE started the LMS leasing company in 1994. The 60 units were used by Conrail in peak traffic periods and leased out to other roads in slack periods. In this way, they avoided the mothball fleet problem, and instead of units rusting in place on home rails, they were out generating revenue somewhere else. We're just in time for a meet between an eastbound TV100 intermodal train and a westbound ML435 heading to Sterling, Michigan. This is north of Palmyra, where Road 210 meets Division Street. TVLA was Conrail's hottest train. Nothing was allowed to get in the way of this train that ran coast to coast in 76 hours by teaming up with the BNSF and the Santa Fe before that. Guy Park is a New York state park. It's a fine place to watch trains in this area. It's along the Mohawk River at Lock 11. The historic mansion here was built by Guy Johnson around 1740. It's convenient to the town of Amsterdam across the tracks. The tracks are on the edge of the park itself. CNSE runs from Montreal via Messina, New York, and Syracuse, New York, to Selkirk. This is SEPI from Selkirk, New York to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The news of CSX and Norfolk Southern buying Conrail is still fresh news here in June 1997. It will take a year before the Surface Transportation Board approves it in 1998. The Amsterdam-New York station is a 10-minute walk west of the park. We'll be there at dawn, June 28, 1997. It's a nice place to pause and reflect. From the early 1600s, the Mohawk River was used by the Mohawk tribe's swift canoes to bring high-value commerce, namely furs, down to a Dutch trading post near present-day Albany, New York. The Dutch were more interested in trade than land. It was a good arrangement. The Mohawk flows into the Hudson River, bringing goods down to ports. Most of these furs were shipped to Europe, with manufactured goods shipped back to North America. In more recent times, the high-value commerce moves both ways using containers on intermodal trains along the banks of the Mohawk River. This was part of the famous New York Central water level route. This is the westbound TV-203 from Kearney, New Jersey to Chicago, Illinois. Following are two more westbound intermodals. By 1996, you could see it coming. Out west, mergers had reduced the U.S. railroads down to two super systems. Back east, there were three U.S. roads, Conrail being the smallest by now. Even with all of its successful years, Conrail couldn't remain independent for much longer. By 1998, the Surface Transportation Board approved a split-up of Conrail into two portions. The old New York Central section was sold to CSX, 42% of the original Conrail system. The remaining 58% went to Norfolk Southern, reflecting the old Pennsylvania lines. The split of a large, healthy system, and coupled with dual mergers, was something new. These two system portions finally came under new operation by June 1999. This is SEBO, bound for Boston, far back in July 1978. With a lot of hard work and that bright future blue paint, Conrail made it from this to this. When Conrail began, all the railroads were being considered for nationalization by many in the U.S. House and Senate. What Conrail accomplished in 2 decades was important to all U.S. railroads.